The Lemnorians' desperate transmission pierced through the void of space. All hope is lost until he came. This distress signal would soon draw human explorer Frank Robertson into a race against time to save an alien race from annihilation on the dying world of Lemnar 7. Frank's solo vessel touched down on the barren gray plains stretching before the ruins of a once advanced Lemnorian city. Crumbling skyscrapers clawed at the toxic yellow sky like skeletal fingers of some long-dead titan. Choking black smoke belched from the shells of buildings gutted by disaster and decay. Nothing moved, no signs of life. Then, a lone figure emerged from the haze, approaching Frank's ship with a halting, limping gait. Raxer, a haggard Lemnorian engineer, stood before the human explorer, his scaly hide hanging loose on his malnourished frame. Frank noted the alien's eyes, devoid of light, yet flickering with the faintest embers of defiant intelligence. "Why have you come here, Earthborn?" Raxer asked, his voice a dry rasp. "This graveyard cannot be your destination. Nothing remains for you on Lemnar 7 but the ashes of our once great species." "I intercepted your distress signal," Frank replied, disembarking from his ship, boots stirring up clouds of thin gray dust. "I'm here to understand what happened, and to help if I can." A harsh bark of laughter escaped Raxer's throat. "Help? Your cycle's too late for that, human. Our verdant homeworld is now a toxic, resource-starved husk. A series of cataclysms and a virulent plague has reduced our population to mere hundreds. The few wretched survivors cling to a hopeless existence, eking out a meager sustenance from the dying land. With our infrastructure in ruins and our technology failing day by day, we can no longer escape this hell we once called home. After so much death and suffering, we Lemnorians have abandoned all hope." Frank squared his shoulders, jaw set with determination. "You may have lost hope, but I haven't. If there's still a chance to save your species, I'll find it. Show me what remains of your technology and resources. Maybe human ingenuity can make the difference between extinction and survival." Raxer shook his head, but gestured for Frank to follow. As the human explorer surveyed the apocalyptic landscape now strangling all traces of life from this dying world, he couldn't deny the astronomical odds towering before him like the endless mountains of debris and wreckage littering the decaying city. Yet deep within his chest, a very human spark ignited, the unquenchable flame of willpower that had allowed his species to conquer seas, skies, and stars against impossible barriers. If Frank failed here, an entire civilization faced oblivion. Billions of lives across future generations would be extinguished before they could even begin. The Lemnorians no longer believed in miracles. Frank would just have to restore their faith, one scientific breakthrough at a time. He had no other choice. Turning his back on Lemnar 7, on Raxer and the other survivors, felt as alien to Frank as abandoning his own species to certain doom. That was not the human way. So, as the explorer and the engineer picked their way through the ruins of a fallen empire, a wordless pact solidified between the two. They would find a way to save the Lemnorians, or they would die trying. On a planet devoid of all hope, could one human's indomitable will, brilliant mind, and bold vision make the difference between a future and oblivion? The Lemnorians would soon discover the depths of human determination, for their survival now hinged on one man's refusal to accept an unwinnable scenario. As Frank and Raxer toiled endlessly on the Ark ship, sweat dripping from their brows and muscles aching from the ceaseless labor, they faced a growing tide of resistance from within the Lemnorian ranks. Zorgax, a cunning and ruthless politician, saw the human's presence as a direct threat to his own power and influence. He whispered poisonous lies into the ears of the survivors, stoking the fires of fear and mistrust. "This human is here to exploit us," Zorgax hissed, his eyes glinting with malice. "He seeks to steal our technology and resources for his own gain, leaving us to rot on this dying world." Despite the spreading misinformation, Frank and Raxor pushed forward, their commitment unshakable. They worked side by side, combining human ingenuity with Lemnorian expertise, adapting and innovating in ways never before imagined. In a moment of breathtaking realization, they unlocked the secret to powering the immense Ark ship, harnessing the energy of Lemnar 7's dying star, a feat once deemed impossible. As they prepared to test the star-harnessing technology, the ground beneath their feet shook with a violent tremor. Alarms blared, and the acrid stench of smoke filled the air. Zorgax and his followers had sabotaged the equipment, leaving destruction in their wake. The Ark ship groaned and shuddered, the dreams of salvation teetering on the brink of oblivion. Frank and Raxor stumbled from the wreckage, their faces ashen with the weight of the betrayal. The lifeless bodies of Lemnorian engineers lay strewn amid the rubble, their sacrifices a testament to the depths of Zorgax's treachery. In that moment of despair, Frank and Raxor were forced to confront the possibility that their efforts might be futile. But Frank refused to yield. He gathered the remaining Lemnorians, his voice ringing out with unwavering conviction. Life, in all its forms, possesses an indomitable spirit, he declared, his eyes blazing with purpose. Hope is the light that guides us through the darkest of times. We must not let that light be extinguished. His words ignited a spark in the hearts of the Lemnorians, transforming despair into grit. They saw in Frank a beacon of resilience, a symbol of the unyielding human spirit. With renewed purpose, Frank and Raxor embarked on a daring mission to repair the damaged star-harnessing technology and expose Zorgax's duplicity. They infiltrated the politician's stronghold, a labyrinthine maze of secrets and shadows. There, they uncovered the shocking truth. Zorgax had been collaborating with a rogue AI, using its power to maintain his grip on the Lemnorians, even as their world crumbled to dust. In a tense confrontation, Frank and Raxor stood shoulder to shoulder, facing off against Zorgax and his loyal followers. The air crackled with the energy of advanced weapons, powered by the twisted machinations of the rogue AI. A fierce battle erupted, the fate of the Lemnorians hanging in the balance. Frank and Raxor fought as one, their bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity. They dodged searing blasts of energy, their weapons flashing in the chaotic fray. As the battle reached its fever pitch, Frank saw an opportunity, a chance to end Zorgax's reign of deception. With a cry of defiance, Frank leapt forward, risking everything to destroy the AI's central processor, the source of Zorgax's power. The gambit was a desperate one, but fate smiled upon the human's bravery. The processor exploded in a shower of sparks and shrapnel, and with it, Zorgax's hold over the Lemnorians shattered like glass. In the aftermath of the battle, the truth of Zorgax's betrayal lay bare for all to see. The Lemnorians, free from the shackles of fear and lies, rallied behind Frank and Raxor. Together, they surged forward, pouring every ounce of strength and perseverance into the completion of the Ark ship. Time became a blur as they worked, each passing moment a precious commodity. They faced countless setbacks and challenges, but they met each one head-on, fueled by the knowledge that failure would mean the extinction of an entire race. The weight of responsibility settled heavily upon Frank and Raxor's shoulders, but they bore it with unwavering drive. The smoldering ruins of Zorgax's stronghold lay behind them as Frank and Raxor stood before the assembled Lemnorians. Exhaustion etched lines on their faces, but purpose burned in their eyes. "We've overcome treachery and deceit," Frank's voice rang out. "Now we face our greatest challenge yet. We must complete the Ark ship before Lemnar 7 becomes uninhabitable. It's time to unite and work as one." Raxor nodded, his scaled hand resting on Frank's shoulder. "Every moment counts. We need all hands working round the clock." The construction site buzzed with activity. Lemnorians swarmed over the massive frame of the Ark ship, welding, wiring, and assembling. Frank climbed scaffolding, shouting instructions and encouragement. Raxor pored over schematics, coordinating teams of engineers. Days blurred together in a haze of ceaseless labor. Then, disaster struck. Alarms blared across the site. Raxor burst into the command center, scales pale with worry. The star harnessing tech is malfunctioning. Energy output is fluctuating wildly. Frank frowned, studying the readouts. What's causing it? It's not the tech, Raxor said grimly. It's Lemnar 7's star itself. It's becoming increasingly unstable. Silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Without a stable power source, the Ark ship was doomed. Frank paced, mind racing. He spun to face Raxor. We need to stabilize the star's core. A series of controlled plasma charges could do it. Raxor's eyes widened. That's insane. It would require flying directly into the corona. No one could survive that. I can, Frank said firmly. My human physiology gives me the best shot. No, Raxor shouted. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. We'll find another way. The argument raged, voices rising in intensity. Finally, Frank placed his hands on Raxor's shoulders. My friend, this is bigger than me. Your entire species is at stake. I have to try. Raxor's shoulders slumped in defeat. He nodded, then set about preparing the mission. Hours later, Frank stood before a heavily shielded shuttle, encased in advanced protective gear. Raxor braced him tightly. Come back to us, he whispered. The shuttle launched, streaking towards Lemnar 7's dying star. Frank gritted his teeth as he plunged into the corona, buffeted by plasma storms. Sweat poured down his face as he navigated deeper, the heat becoming nearly unbearable even through his suit. Back on the planet's surface, Raxor hunched over a control panel. Deploy the first charge, he instructed, voice tense. Frank's fingers flew over the controls. Charge away, he reported, moving to the next coordinates. Communications grew spotty as Frank pushed deeper into the star. Raxor strained to hear through the static. Frank! Come in, Frank! Silence. The Lemnorians held their breath, seconds stretching into agonizing minutes. Then, a crackle of static. Mission done, accomplished, Frank's weak voice came through. Returning to surface. Cheers erupted as Frank's battered shuttle touched down. The hatch opened and he stumbled out, suit blackened and smoking. Raxor caught him as he fell forward. You did it, Raxor said, voice thick with emotion. The star's stable. We can power the Ark ship. Frank managed a weary smile. Then let's finish this thing. The Lemnorians surged forward, re-energized by Frank's heroism. As one united force, they threw themselves into the final stages of construction. The Ark ship took shape before their eyes, a beacon of hope rising from the ashes of their dying world. The triumph of stabilizing Lemnar 7's star was short-lived. Frank and Raxor stood on a crumbling balcony, watching as toxic gases billowed from fissures in the ground. The planet shuddered beneath their feet, another tremor rippling through the dying world. We're out of time, Frank said, his face grim. The Ark ship needs to launch now. Raxor nodded, his scales dulled with exhaustion. Agreed, but it's not ready. We need weeks, maybe months. We don't have months, we barely have days. They raced to the command center, barking orders into comms. Lemnorians scrambled to obey, loading vital supplies and equipment onto the half-finished Ark ship. Frank established a triage system, prioritizing the evacuation of the sick and elderly. As the first groups boarded, a commotion erupted at the perimeter. Kravox, a scarred veteran of Zorgax's regime, led a mob of extremists toward the launch site. Traitors, Kravox bellowed. You'd abandon our sacred home for the void of space? Frank tried to reason with them. Your world is dying. This ship is the only hope for your people's survival. Kravox spat on the ground. Better to die here than live as cowards. Raxor's security forces formed a barrier, but Kravox's followers slipped through. They sabotaged critical systems, destroying equipment and derailing the evacuation efforts. In the chaos, a team of extremists breached the Ark ship itself. Alarms blared. Frank and Raxor raced through the corridors, desperate to stop the infiltrators. They reached the engine room just as Kravox's team finished planting explosive charges. No! Frank lunged forward, but it was too late. The charges detonated. The blast knocked Frank and Raxor off their feet, slamming them against a bulkhead. When the smoke cleared, they saw the devastation. The Ark ship's main engines were a twisted wreck of metal and circuitry. Frank punched the floor in frustration. "It's over! We can't launch now!" Raxor slumped against the wall. "Perhaps we could establish a colony here. Buy ourselves more time." They ran projections, but the numbers didn't lie. Lemnar 7's atmosphere would be completely toxic within months. The planet's core was destabilizing. There was no future here. Frank paced the room, mind racing. He stopped suddenly, an idea forming. "The probes. We still have the long-range scouts." "What good will those do?" Raxor asked. "We send them out. Search for a habitable world within reach. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." Raxor hesitated, then nodded. "Let's do it." They repurposed the Ark ship's remaining systems, cannibalizing parts to construct a fleet of unmanned probes. As the devices launched into space, Frank and Raxor could only wait and hope. Weeks crawled by. The air grew thicker with pollutants. Earthquakes rattled the foundations of their shelter. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm them, a signal pinged on their screens. "We found something," Frank breathed, scarcely daring to believe it. "A planet. Nexus. It's perfect." The news spread like wildfire. Even Kravox and his extremists, faced with the imminent death of their world, put aside their objections. Every able-bodied Lemnorian threw themselves into repairing the Ark ship. They worked around the clock, scavenging parts and improvising solutions. Frank's human ingenuity meshed with Lemnorian technical expertise, achieving the impossible. As they made final preparations, the ground began to shake violently. Cracks spread across the launch platform. Raxor looked at Frank, panic in his eyes. "We're not ready." Frank gritted his teeth. "We have to go, now." He slammed his hand on the launch controls. With a deafening roar, the Ark ship's engines ignited. The vessel shuddered, straining against gravity's pull. For a heart-stopping moment, Frank thought they wouldn't break free. Then, with a final surge of power, the Ark ship tore away from Lemnar 7's disintegrating surface. As they soared into the stars, leaving their ruined homeworld behind, Frank and Raxor shared a look of stubborn persistence. The journey to Nexus would be long and fraught with danger, but they had given the Lemnorians a chance at survival. Together they would forge a new future among the stars. The Ark ship carved through the void, its hull groaning under the strain of prolonged spaceflight. Inside, Frank and Raxor stood before a holographic display of the ship's systems, their faces illuminated by the flashing red warnings. "Life support's barely holding," Frank muttered, his fingers dancing across the controls. "We're running on fumes here, Raxor." The Lemnorian's scales shifted, a sign of his unease. "The people grow restless. They fear we've traded one doom for another." As if summoned by his words, angry shouts echoed from the corridor outside. The door slid open, revealing Kravox, his scarred face contorted with rage. A group of Lemnorians crowded behind him, their eyes gleaming with fear and resentment. "You've doomed us all," Kravox snarled, jabbing a clawed finger at Frank. "We should have died with dignity on our homeworld, not suffocate in this metal coffin." Frank stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "Kravox, please. We're all scared, but we need to work together." A sudden lurch sent everyone stumbling. Alarms blared as the ship's computer announced, "Hull breach detected. Sections 12 through 15 compromised." Chaos erupted. Kravox's supporters surged forward, grappling with those loyal to Frank and Raxor. In the melee, someone struck a control panel. Sparks flew as circuits overloaded. The ship shuddered violently. A deafening crack split the air, followed by the hiss of escaping atmosphere. Through the viewport, Frank watched in horror as a massive fissure opened in the ship's hull. Lemnorians, caught in the suddenly depressurized corridor, were sucked into the merciless vacuum of space. "We have to seal it off," Raxor shouted over the din of alarms and screams. "The whole ship will decompress." Frank's mind raced. He grabbed Raxor's arm, locking eyes with his friend. We need to evacuate everyone we can to the inner sectors. I'll lead a team outside to patch the breach. Raxor's scales paled. Frank, no, it's suicide. We don't have a choice, Frank said, his voice firm despite the fear churning in his gut. Get everyone to safety. I'll do what I can out there. As Raxor herded the survivors deeper into the ship, Frank assembled a small team of volunteers. They donned their EVA suits in grim silence, each knowing the odds of survival were slim. At the airlock, Frank paused. He gripped Raxor's shoulder, words failing him. The Lemnorian's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Come back to us, Raxor whispered, echoing words from what felt like a lifetime ago. Frank nodded, sealing his helmet. The airlock cycled, and then they were out, tethered to the ship's exterior. The yawning tear in the hull gaped before them, edges jagged and sparking. They worked frantically, wielding emergency patches and sealant foam. Frank's hands shook as he manipulated the tools, each movement clumsy in the bulky suit. His air supply ticked steadily downward. A stray piece of debris slammed into one of the Lemnorians, sending him spinning away into the darkness. Another took a glancing blow that cracked her faceplate. Frank watched helplessly as her eyes widened in terror, her mouth opening in a silent scream as the vacuum claimed her. Somehow, despite the challenges, they managed to seal the breach. But as Frank turned back to the airlock, he knew it was too late. His vision swam, lungs burning for oxygen that was no longer there. He saw Raxor's face through the airlock window, anguish etched in every line. Frank's last thought was of the Lemnorians and the hope of a new beginning on Nexus. As his consciousness faded, he prayed it would be enough. Inside the ship, Raxor's legs gave out as he watched Frank's lifeless form drift away from the airlock. A keening wail of grief tore from his throat, echoed by the surviving Lemnorians. Even Kravok stood silent, the fight gone out of him in the face of such sacrifice. In the days that followed, a change came over the survivors. The dissent that had threatened to tear them apart gave way to a solemn unity. They worked tirelessly to repair what damage they could, determined to see Frank's mission through. As the blue-green orb of Nexus grew larger in the viewport, Raxor stood alone, his scaled hand pressed against the transparent barrier. A single tear traced down his cheek, quickly wiped away. "We made it, Frank," he whispered. "You brought us home." The Ark ship began its descent, carrying with it the last of the Lemnorians and the legacy of a human who had given everything for their survival.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.